Okay, hello. So I'm gonna be doing another stream later today, but I thought I'd also do one right now because I was watching a video. I'll sort of put on videos in the background while I um read. And this video in particularly one of the people, the guy to the left there, has pissed me off to a degree that is hard for me to articulate, and I, it'll become clear exactly why. But so this is the Majority Report. It's a podcast hosted by Sam Cedar. He's like a kind of left liberal policy wonk guy. He's a talking head on MSNBC, I think, at times. And he's sort of known for debating various right wingers, and he's debating. I think this guy is like a YouTuber. If he's not, I don't really care. I don't really care to get right what he actually is, because I think he's a horrendous person. But he's debating this guy, calls himself Actual Justice Warrior, extremely cringy name, but we'll overlook that for a second. And his they're debating crime and policing, and he's in this Actual Justice Warrior guy is arguing for a sort of tough on crime position. And don't complain about me not having ad blocker, because I haven't been using this browser for very long, so I haven't downloaded ad blocker. Sue me. But so they're debating crime. This sort of Actual Justice Warrior guy is arguing for tough on crime position. And as it gets later into the video, the beginning of the video is just like a lot of half-baked empirics that contradicts itself from this guy. A lot of really silly narrative about cops being scared to do their job because of the George Floyd protests. Which is bizarre. But like, that stuff's not really the interesting part. The interesting part that pissed me off was when he starts trying to give his arguments for why poverty is not a driver of crime, which is a stupid fucking thing to say, right? But it's something, I guess, that these kinds of people really believe in their heart of hearts, because it lets them sleep at night with the ideology that they endorse. Which is, whatever. But yeah, so I'm gonna sort of give some commentary on that, because I actually feel like almost obligated to use whatever platform I have, right? My little bit over 2K subscribers, to point out the kind of dangerous fraudulence that people like this engage in. This video is from 3 months ago. I'm just watching it now. This is off the cuff completely. This just pissed me off, and I felt I had to do this, right? So
towards the community, understanding and elevating into success.
Could be attributed to some, not all, of the reforms. I'm not saying the prison population reduction here.
What do you think
that the fact that we're not able to hold repeat offenders is what is causing that? If you locked up those 327 people, guess what? You have a third of the retail theft arrests gone, because they keep committing the crime.
How many people would you have to lock up to make sure that you got the right 327?
Of 6
up and throw away the key.
Serious prosecute
7. Now, you don't know who they shop locked up for as long as you
we
want.
Should prosecute shoplifting for 27 people. Then we don't let you out without bail. Like a judge would be able to have judgment to determine.
Like where do we put it, right? We just
well, aren't you against cash bail? Because right now,
according to you?
Yeah, they're repeat offenders, and eventually, I've covered multiple stories of Home Depot workers being killed. We find out that the person behind the theft that led to killing that worker was arrested a bunch of times for these so-called petty crimes. You could have got them off the streets, and then somebody dies over it. Some poor person who works, for whatever, $15 an hour at Home Depot gets killed by somebody who wanted a power drill. So yeah, I want those people off the streets for sure.
So what do you think drives crime?
What I think drives crime?
Yeah.
Well, I think
crime?
policy. I think public policy has a big impact. There are people that are opportunistic that will commit crime if they think there are no consequences, whether they be social or whether they be through the criminal justice system. And I've broken this down. You can think of it as a pyramid.
Now, here's where I sort of I rolled my eyes because, of course, when it comes to crime and this kind of ideology, I mean, there's not any analysis of social. I mean, I'm really on any of these issues. There's not any analysis of social reality. What there is this imposition of abstract categories of certain types of people that do certain types of things by disposition, and there's not really any reason that they do those certain types of things. That's just the way it is, right? And so, when he's, not really understanding the point of Sam's question or answering it, right? Sam asks him, what's the driver of crime? And he basically just says, well, there are people that commit crime. Okay. But why is the point of the question. So there I sort of, roll my eyes, but that was sort of what I was expecting. This takes a turn that maybe I'm stupid for not expecting. Maybe I'm naive for not expecting, but this takes a turn into what I'll say is a really dark path, but we'll see that.
With 3 layers. The lowest part of the pyramid is the criminal justice system, the actual consequences. And the reason why this is one of the lowest deterrents is and by the way, I'm not making this up. This comes from criminal justice theory. The reason why this is one of the lowest deterrents.
I was assuming I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt that you're not.
I'm just saying it's not my theory. But the deterrence doesn't really work. It's not really that effective because most people, when they commit a crime, don't think they're going to get caught. The next stage in that pyramid would be the social consequences. So if people will treat you like a pariah if you are arrested and convicted of a crime, that is a stronger deterrent against you committing crimes. And then the top of the pyramid, the number one thing is if you believe that the law is moral and or just, that is what's going to prevent you from criminality.
Okay. And so if you live in a society where everybody lives in around you lives in extreme poverty, do you think that numbers, I think was it 2 and 3 on your pyramid? I mean, in other words, so what would you do if I put you in charge of social policy and you could be king for a day or, a couple of weeks or whatever it is? What would you do? What would you do to what do you think the most effective thing we could do to fight? Like you say, there's always going to be some folks who, I don't know, living on the edge and committing crimes. But broadly speaking, what would you do?
How do you mean?
Well, you just worked out a pyramid for us. And so put that into practice, if that's the pyramid that you believe in.
By the way, the level to which this guy sucks balls at answering direct questions. This is something that everybody should look out for whenever they're debating sophist pieces of shit, right? Because you'll find that you'll get the direct answers to questions will be very, very scarce, right? And the comprehension of very simple questions, like what kinds of policies would you implement to deal with crime, right? Which is part of the thing he came on here to debate. The understanding of very simple questions will also be sort of impaired, right? Because these people, and it's not because they're stupid, right? It's because these people are just coming up with bullshit to support their ideology, right?
Again, how do you mean? Like I just told you what prevents people from committing crimes. Like how would I put that into practice? Are you talking about from a law enforcement point of view? It would depend entirely where I am, because crime is different depending on the city. It's very much down to the local municipality. So if I was designing an intervention for New York City, it would be completely different than an intervention for the city of St. Louis or the city of Chicago.
Look at how stupid these ads are, man. Anyway,
again, like, what do you mean?
Capitalism is great.
Yeah.
Okay, what would you do in New York City, let's say, to deal with crime? I mean, you're like I mean, I guess like when we're looking at the causes of crime here, and you just laid out some type of pyramid. It sounded like you discounted the punishment one, which was the widest one, right? I mean, my understanding
deterrence actually, but yes.
Yeah, but that doesn't deter. You don't think that deters because people don't think they're going to get caught.
Yeah, a lot of people don't think they're going to get caught. So that's why I'm in
it's
favor.
Not a function of cops in terms of like.
No, you misunderstand. Deterrence is not that effective of a strategy from a law enforcement level, but that doesn't mean incapacitation is not an effective strategy. So
locking up more people
would be removing repeat offenders.
And so locking up more people, but how would you get there, I guess, is what you're talking about.
The first thing I would do in the state of New York, because again, it is dependent on the area, is that I would get rid of bail reform law and allow judges to have judgment. I think it's ridiculous the way we operate in the city of New York. If we're concerned about people that are poor, that can't afford their bail for lower crimes, I understand that. I would reduce the bail amounts, but what I need is for the judges to be able to assess dangerousness.
Dangerousness. So you're only talking violent crimes.
Or repeat offenders, like the original bail reform, and they've amended it to remove certain things, didn't even factor in bail jumping as a crime that could get you held. So if you didn't show up for court.
But now that's changed. When did that change?
They might have changed that specific portion, but I know they used to have aggravated vehicular manslaughter as a charge that was not bail eligible, and they did change that. So like, yeah, there have been some changes to it. They actually update it every year around April when the budget comes in. So I'm not exactly sure which specific crimes, but I want judges to be able to assess repeat offenders. I don't want to be in a position where they cannot hold somebody as long as they commit this crime, and then they're incentivized to recommit the same crime over and over again.
So you want, let's say, you'd be okay with like judge's discretion on bail if it's someone who has been arrested for 5 times on the same crime. Is that it?
Yeah, depending on the crime, of course. Right. If it's jaywalking, I don't care about jaywalking.
You don't think people should be arrested for jaywalking, do you? Okay.
I mean, even ticketing. It's New York City. I mean, everybody crosses every which way, you know.
But you think that's the most important thing, bail reform?
I think bail reform is a huge deal in the state of New York, and it impacts almost every county. I believe when the governor's race was going on, we had something like 98% of counties, or 98 out of like 101 counties. I don't remember exactly how many counties, so it might have been a percentage that saw an increase in crime. So
you discount the bottom part about deterrent on that pyramid. What was the
deterrence
second?
Is the lowest and one of the least effective. Yes.
I don't get why that's on the, on the bottom you think is the least effective.
Yeah.
And then the middle one is, what's the next one?
That would be like societal pressure. If you feel like you're going to be an outcast from your community or treated like a pariah, like the social pressure that keeps you.
So like he's making this one thing that I think doesn't really wash with the narrative is that he's making this point about how, the things that sort of deter crime, in the hierarchy of things that deter crime, according to his reading of legal theory. I'm not sure if this is actually true, but we'll go with it, right? Assume it's true. In the hierarchy of things that actually deter crime, police intervention and the law and so forth is at the bottom, and sort of social stigmatization is sort of more effective, and then the most effective is when the people who might otherwise commit crimes view the law as moral. right? Like morally just, they view the law as morally justified, and so they don't want to break it. Now, if that's true, why the fuck is this joker arguing for tough on crime policies, i.e., the state stepping up the degree to which it pursues, incarcerates, polices criminals? Why is he advocating for stepping up the thing that's the least effective by his own metric? Like, how fucking stupid do you have to be?
In line.
Okay, and then social pressure, right? And how would you increase that social pressure?
Well, I think we should do more to stigmatize criminals for sure.
How would you stigmatize?
Well,
criminals
I
more?
would stop treating them like they're Aladdin, like your co-host does, where they're just like thieves with a heart of gold.
You know, it's interesting. So the stigmatization of criminals, right? So, okay, what this person is advocating is we need to stigmatize criminals and we need the state to be tough on crime. Okay. If you look at Stalin era USSR, those two things were pervasive. The stigmatization of criminals as a justification for the state being tough on crime, right? And I'm not exactly sure why people like this will sort of view societies like Russia under Stalin as repressive, but then will advocate for things that were sort of like the backbone of the criminal justice system and the attitude towards crime in those societies. Which, by the way, there's similarities, right, between what was going on then and what's going on in the United States now, which is that criminality is used as an excuse in the USSR under Stalin to lock people up and essentially force them to work without pay in the gulag. Here, today, in the United States, supposed criminality is used as a justification for locking people up and making the prisoners work for the prison industry for, some pay, but it's a pittance, right? To the point that where people call this like the American gulag, right? So, I'm not, why exactly conservatives are mirroring Stalinist policies and politics, I'm not exactly sure, but
I would stop like sympathizing with them and sympathize with the victims.
Okay, so we in the case of shoplifting, we should sympathize with like Walmart or something more, and
we should sympathize with the community who has to pay for that in higher prices, or the people who lose their jobs because these stores shut down. We should sympathize with these people.
You think stores shut down because
of end up traveling further due to the fact that there's less grocery stores in their area. Yeah, we should sympathize with them rather than the opportunistic thieves.
Okay, and so you think that that
the opportunistic thieves, like the opportunistic thieves who stole socialist property in the USSR during, the famines in the 1930s.
There's thieves out there that Emma's walking amongst, and they're all like
that Emma's walking amongst. No, I would never say that. I would never think she would actually.
You think the thieves are watching the show? You think the thieves are watching the show and they're going, it's okay.
More cops are going to retire. It's not just the majority report per se, but there's this general dismissive nature towards these retail thieves. Like you can see it on every reply in the videos. Like now there's people that are definitely against it.
Has that changed over time?
I think, yes, people have become more sympathetic to people, and possibly due to the fact that we have the pandemic. So the excuse is that these people
wait a second, dude. Why was there this huge drop in crime? Why was this huge drop in crime? Why did that take place? So in 1990, for instance, let's say, or 87,
I had no idea the water filters I've been using forever were so.
people were too sympathetic to shoplifters.
and-
And then in the 90s, later in the 90s, they were less sympathetic to shoplifters. And that's why it went down.
Well, no, there is an overall sentiment change. I mean, for you to not acknowledge this is ridiculous. Like, go look at Joe Biden on the floor of the Senate pushing the crime bill and listen to the way Joe Biden talks about crime now. I'm into. I
Crime
want
was high. My point is, crime was higher.
1990s Joe Biden.
So he just said he wants to date 1990s Joe Biden for pushing the crime bill. A racist bill that was geared toward discrimination against Black Americans. I'm sure he has some story about, oh, that bill wasn't really racist, because I have some misinterpretation of the law or the data, right? But just so everybody's aware, this guy wants to copulate or whatever with Joe Biden because Joe Biden pushed what is pretty roundly considered today to be a racist policy.
Yeah, they're passing a law.
1990s Joe Biden was harsher on crime, and crime began to drop precipitously.
Yes. Crime started to drop or drop nationwide after that crime bill. Yes.
Oh, I see what you're saying. And then crime shot up. Like when did we start as a society? Just in the past 2 years, have we gotten more sympathetic to shoplifters?
I do think people have become more sympathetic to criminals and less sympathetic to the police. 100%. I don't know about your coverage.
Is it about the police or is it about the criminals? I thought it was.
Well, we're
really
talking about
stigma.
cultural attitudes related to crime in the criminal justice system. So yeah, when I talk about retail thefts, there's a lot of excuse making. I'm sure you have people on your staff that have said it's no big deal, or my favorite one where it's like wage theft actually is more than the retail theft, wage theft isn't spread out over the entire economy, as if that has anything to do with what we're talking about in the first place.
Wait a second. You just said the problem with shoplifting is what it does to the community. You don't think wage theft? There's something like, what are the numbers that you understand wage theft to be on an annual basis?
Well, I know that you guys like to use the 2013 chart because it has a very big disparity that comes from the Economic Policy Institute.
The wage? Well, I mean, it's not just the Economic Policy Institute, but what do you put wage theft at?
I would put it at the tens of billions. I think the number that you guys often cite is around 50 billion, even though what you're citing is the wages recovered. But
the wages recovered. Wages recovered was closer to, I think, 20 billion. But the annual, the estimates I've seen are anywhere from like $3 to $6 billion annually, because you don't always recover it. At all. But you think that loss
the recovered would be 20 billion, but the annual
20 billion over the course of 10 years.
Over the course of 10 years.
Yeah, that's the stat that the DOJ puts out. But the point is that I just want to be clear on this. Shoplifting hurts a community more than people.
I didn't say it hurts the community more. It's just a different problem. So what you're doing is
crime.
So what you guys do is
wage theft isn't crime, but somebody stealing whatever it is from Walmart is something we need to be tough on. Fucking genius.
Talk about a problem, or someone like me talks about a problem.
Wait, Sean, is that
and
not
then you
crime?
say, "Hey, look at
Don't
this
get
other
mad
problem."
at.
By the way, earlier he went on about how shoplifters actually are dangerous because I know of instances in which people became violent when they were being apprehended or whatever. The interesting thing about that is, and this is just anecdotal, but I've known people who have done like the security work for retail. Like, they're the people who go around and try to spot shoplifters. Those people have like a quota they have to meet. In other words, regardless of whether there's actually any theft going on, they need to catch a bunch of people supposedly stealing. Right? Now, if you're trying to meet your quota, right, and you like unjustly target me because you can spin it in a way that I might be stealing, and therefore you'll make the quota and you'll get paid at the end of the quarter or whatever it is. Yeah, that, I mean, people turn violent in those situations.
Problem.
Don't get
because
meta.
two
Just
wrongs
address.
makes a who cares. I guess.
Don't get meta. Just address the issue. This is wage theft, right? We both agree it's a crime.
Yeah, you shouldn't do it, and I'm in favor of.
Well, it's illegal. It's not just. It's not. It's
Yes.
illegal. Okay.
I just said I'm in favor of the prosecution of it.
And in fact, we're talking about the same people too, right? Like, because when you say, well, people don't sympathize with a corporation when there is shoplifting and it's going to hurt the workers there and the community because of high prices, and presumably, high prices are going to hurt low income people more than others.
Well, to be clear,
I just want to be clear. I just want to be clear what you're saying.
Well, we're not talking.
That is, how is that really not hitting the exact same players?
Well, Sam, we're not talking about the same people because, again, wage theft is spread out over the entire economy. When we talk about retail theft, that typically, now I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, involves the retail sector. So what you're actually doing is
where do you think
expanding
wage
the
theft
denominator.
is highest?
I would think probably in government contracts. A lot of these have issues with the Davis-Bacon law where they're underpaying. It probably is in major corporations with unpaid overtime. I think it's in a lot of different places, but I do know that a lot of illegal immigrants in the United States of America are entitled to the wages under Davis-Bacon, and they often get cheated. And it is a great moment years later, although sometimes their lives are ruined, when investigators find out that they're backdated pay and they give them a huge check. So I would think it happens in multiple different sectors, not just retail. But yeah, and it has multiple different forms.
I mean, all right. So you're just keying in on shoplifting. That's the crime.
Well, when we talk about retail theft, we typically talk about retail theft.
No, I understand.
You're doing a two wrongs makes a who cares.
No, I'm just saying. I just find it curious. But that's fine. You were the one who brought up wage theft. I just want to be clear.
Yeah,
on that.
because it's a common retort by people who are trying to deflect.
Don't get so meta.
Issue.
Then we won't get hung up on these things.
It's also, nobody talks about stealing from your employer, which many years is actually higher than wage theft. But, there's that too.
Okay. I guess nobody talks about that.
It's not on the charts that you present from the Economic Policy Institute.
I mean, dude, you brought up wage theft.
Yeah, because it's a common retort, and I've seen it brought up on your show.
Well, yeah, wage theft is an issue.
I never said it wasn't.
We've also brought up, that corporations lie about how much they're getting, how much they're suffering from petty theft. I mean, the Walmart, I think, executive admitted that on a call with financiers. Walgreens. They blow it up.
So you're talking about a Walgreens executive where he said, or she, I don't remember. I think it might have been a woman. That it was that we may have overstated this in this specific Walgreens call. But I do remember when Walgreens got into it with London Breed, who claimed that it was completely overstated, and they clarified.
Why not have it all?
Was due to the increase in theft specifically in San Francisco. And honestly, it should be alarming that these stores are closing in left-wing cities disproportionately, considering the giant subsidy that they got from the vaccines. Remember, these corporations were essentially given welfare by being able to be the distributors of these vaccines. That draws people into the stores. And yet at the same time, there's a giant reduction in the number of storefronts in these areas. So you would think in places where
sure
they
COVID had nothing to do with the closure of those stores.
Well, COVID actually had everything to do with the boost in business because these were the distributors of the vaccine.
No, I understand they were to distribute the vaccine, but you're also aware that, people's purchasing patterns changed dramatically during COVID. There's a lot of restaurants that closed. There's a lot.
They closed restaurants, and if you weren't able to ship to delivery, you're pretty much screwed over.
So, you think we need to stigmatize
criminals for sure, 100%.
Criminals more, and that will do it.
Joseph Stalin agrees.
And how do you think we stigmatize criminals? Like what part of society? Like we know that there's, and do you believe there's a correlation between poverty and extreme poverty with crime?
Yes, I know for a fact that crime drives poverty in the United States of America and the world over.
Okay.
So yes, there is a correlation.
Do you think that there is a correlation between that the poverty drives crime?
Yes. I'm sorry,
Okay.
crime drives poverty.
Yeah. Okay. I'm asking you specifically. I know that you're arguing that you think crime creates.
Yeah, so it's extremely hard to make sense of a statement like poverty drives crime, or rather, crime drives poverty. Because, like, is the idea that, like, like the reason that, like, most people on the planet are poor is because they've been criminals at some point in their lives? Because good luck with showing that that's the case, right? Like, I could tell you, like, most people could tell you without even looking at the data offhand that that's fucking false. And good luck marshaling any fucking evidence for that bullshit. Mr. fucking Empirics. Like, these people, they make use of, like, empirical data, right? As if they're going to deliver, like, the real facts of the situation. And then they make wild ass claims like the world over crime is driven by, poverty is driven by crime rather than the other way around.
It's poverty. But I'm asking you now, do you think that poverty creates crime?
I think in certain circumstances, I'm sure it could happen if you go down to a certain level, for sure. But I think that
What does
in
that
order
mean
to
if you
build,
go down to a certain level? What does that mean?
if you're like, well, we have like, well, actually, even that is a bit of a dubious notion. So like American poverty, like you would acknowledge, is relative poverty compared to poverty in like the third world.
Maybe because it's harder to get a job as a felon. Makes no sense. Yeah, I mean, so that's a factor, right? And so maybe you could say that's a way in which crime drives poverty. But also, like, people living on like $2 a day, those people, like, when you see people quote these, extreme poverty has decreased, has been on the decline throughout the world in the 21st century or 20th century, whatever it is, right? When you actually look at the fine print of those stats, what's said there is, what they mean by decrease in extreme poverty is the number of people who are making at least above $1 a day. So that's, compatible with people making $2 a day, right? So, the idea that if I'm making $2 a day, I'm poor because I'm a criminal and not because I'm fucking making $2 a day, like, what kind of bullshit is that?
I mean,
like, you understand that somebody in the United States of America in poverty would be under $12,000, which would be different from somebody who's living on $1.50 a day. Like,
well,
under
you understand that poverty is really
States of America.
I mean,
like, you understand that somebody, well, actually, even that is a bit of a dubious notion. So like American poverty, like you would acknowledge, is relative poverty compared to poverty in like the third world.
I mean,
like, you understand that somebody in the United States of America in poverty would be under $12,000, which would be different from somebody who's living on $1.50 a day. Like,
well,
under
you understand
$12,000.
Yeah, so this is one of the dumbest right-wing talking points that there is. Like, literally, like, seriously, one of the dumbest. The reason it's one of the dumbest is because, yes, right, without looking at the data, right, I can guess that, or we'll just say this, right, the data actually says, right, that there are nations around the world with vast amounts more poverty than the United States. So we can guess maybe, like, somebody in Sudan is much more likely to be making, $1 a day as opposed to somebody living in America. But that doesn't fucking matter, right? Yes, we live in an interconnected universe and things are relative. That doesn't mean that you get to dismiss the poverty that actually exists in this country. For example, the UN is currently very concerned about the wages being paid to employees of big companies in this country like Amazon and Walmart. They're concerned that those wages are not enough to sustain their employees, to the point that they are being supplemented by these companies having their workers go on benefits. And you want to say like, oh, it's relative, so it doesn't really matter. Because you're not working in a sweatshop, so who cares? Like it's just complete, like a complete ration of bullshit.
Poverty is really a function of purchasing power, right?
Sure, purchasing power could have an impact.
Yeah. We all poverty measures are a function of
you can
the state,
adjust
right?
it for sure.
Right. I mean, if you had no stores, there'd be no theft of stuff in there, and that's not really relevant. But okay, yes, I understand that.
You
Yes,
typically need
if you are living in America and you are poor, theoretically, you have access to more stuff than, let's say, you live somewhere else. But
yes.
You do? Okay. All right. And
yeah, so you're talking about relative poverty. So I'm saying at a certain amount, yes, when there's like genuine desperation, like I could see circumstances where that's happening. But what we typically see is that crime is driving the poverty. Like when these people steal from their areas, when they damage
what do you think
places.
drives crime?
What I think drives, I think.
Okay, yeah. So, and this is a particular situation in which this crime is driving the poverty stuff is just wrong. So take the inner cities that are the targets of conservative complaints about so-called black on black crime. Okay? You hear all this rhetoric, oh, you're worried about the police killing black people for no reason, but black people kill each other all the time in the inner city. That kind of bullshit, right? Take those places, right? In those regions, there is a section of the population. It's a minority, by the way. So it's not, everybody in that community is running around killing each other. That's a bullshit talking point. But there is a section of that population that turns to criminal activity precisely because the poverty that those regions are in pressures them into doing that in order to sustain themselves. So he's just saying things that are false.
People, a certain percentage of the population is going to be criminal. They need to be removed from society. So I would say human nature would be a good example.
Human level. What is that?
Yeah, if you're like, we have like, actually, even that is a bit of a dubious notion. So like American poverty, like you would acknowledge, is relative poverty compared to poverty in like the third world. In poverty would be under $12,000, which would be different from somebody who's living.
Right.
Sure, purchasing power could have an impact. Sure.
Right. If you're really relevant, but okay, yes, I understand that. Yes,
typically need.
If you are living in you have access to more stuff than. Okay, all right, and.
Yeah, so you're talking about relative poverty. So I'm saying at a certain amount, yes, when there's like genuine desperation, like I could see circumstances where that's happening. But what we typically see is that crime is driving the poverty. Like when these people steal from their areas, when they damage places. What do you think
drives crime?
What I think people, a certain percentage of the population is going to be criminal. They need to be removed from society. So I would say human nature would be a good example.
Human nature?
Yeah, it's a small percentage of the population that exhibits like a deviant kind of behavior.
Okay, so what do you think drives the majority of crime?
I just said that.
Oh, you think it's just people who are born criminals?
I wouldn't say born criminals, but people who, when you don't have the proper deterrence in place, will commit crimes, yes.
Okay, I wanted you to hear that whole segment in full. So, the narrative, or the conclusion that he's come to through his empirical research in 50,000 quotes, is that there is a certain section The reason that there is crime is because there is a certain section of the population that is just disposed by nature to criminality and deviant behavior, and they need to be removed. That is almost literally a repetition of eugenics era thinking on this issue. What eugenicists who were interested in sterilizing people, and eventually they got interested in just mass murder, were saying about crime is that the reason people are criminals is because they are biologically predisposed to be criminals and they are inferior. Deviant. Right? Quote unquote. This guy is repeating eugenics era pseudoscience. This is what fucking pissed me off enough to do this. To make this stream. This fucking moron is repeating eugenics ideology, right? And using that to justify so-called tough on crime policies. And it's going to get worse, by the way. And, I shouldn't have to tell you that, all that eugenics era bullshit, that none of that was actually true. It was pseudoscience. They made it up. They made it up because they wanted to sterilize and kill people. And lock them away in institutions.
And those deterrents could be police deterrents, like I said earlier, or social deterrents, or whatever.
Not like everybody is subject to the same deterrents, right?
Not necessarily.
Explain this. Because
I'll give you an example. So in New York City, disproportionately, the people who live in public housing happen to be Orthodox Jewish people, right? They do not commit crimes at the same rates as other demographics. They're in fact among the lowest. They commit crimes near around where Asians do. So they're probably better than your average middle-class white person in the city of New York. I think that they have a stronger social structure than other groups in the United States of America, even if they're equivalent in poverty levels.
So that's another thing to pay attention to. Because of their social structure or whatever, Jewish people, white people, Asians are less disposed to be criminals than other groups of people. Think about the kind of people that usually say stuff like that.
So if I was to look at like the incarceration rates of black people, for instance, relative to white people, your argument would be that there's something fundamental about their social structure that is why that we see those incarceration rates higher.
Well, it would be based on their behavior for the one-to-one, but if you're asking me for like an underlying cause to the behavior, which by the way, I don't care about because root causes are not more important than any other cause. Let's be clear about that. So this is just like another rabbit hole, pointless like argument that has nothing to do with the subject matter, in my opinion. It's not.
Yeah, so you have to be like almost brain dead to make the hand wave comment that, oh, root causes are just they're not any more important than other causes. To say that requires you be a fucking moron, right? The obvious reason that root causes are the more important, if you're talking about actually preventing things that you don't want to happen, is because the root causes are the main drivers of the phenomena. So if you address other things that aren't the root causes, what you're doing is you're putting Band-Aids on it, at best. In this guy's case, I wouldn't be so generous to call it Band-Aids. And like kindergartners understand that. This guy is an idiot, so he doesn't.
Not useful or productive. But yeah, I would say that there are definite cultural differences between, what were the groups that you said, Black Americans and white Americans? Yeah, there's definitely cultural differences between Black Americans and white Americans, and more tolerance to criminality. And by the way, there's differences between Black New Yorkers and Black people in Chicago, and that's also reflected in the rates. And I think that does lead to different outcomes in terms of criminal justice.
And you think it's
Yeah. So just to sort of emphasize what we heard there, the regional caveat that he just fucking irrelevant. The substance of what he just said is that black people are different from white people in culture, such that, let's get his exact wording.
And I think that does lead to in black people in Chicago, and that's also reflected in the rates. And I think that does lead to different outcomes in terms of criminal justice.
and you think it's unrelated to
Black people and white people are different in terms of their culture, such that they have different outcomes related to criminal justice. You know, if I didn't have the absolute confidence in this man's ability to not be a racist thug piece of garbage, I would maybe think that he's suggesting that, like, black people have an inferior criminal culture or something like that. The fact that these people are still getting away with this Southern strategy, fucking dog whistle BS, is a fucking travesty. These are the same people who want to tell you that racism doesn't exist. Martin Luther King existed, so racism is no more. Then they say this 10 seconds later.
things like poverty or systemic racism or
Well, if we're going to use poverty as the metric and we compare poor Black Americans to poor Asians or poor Hispanics, and by the way, Hispanics commit more crimes on average, but less than Black Americans, then obviously poverty is not the determining factor if the crime rates vary wildly within
well, I have
groups
an
in the same
analogy for
status.
you. When you build in a house,
By the way, as I said before, in terms of the like these inner city places, poverty is the driving factor, right? That is just a fact. He's a fucking snake oil peddling piece of garbage. So I'm sort of unsure how much of this is just him fraudulently repeating bullshit that he maybe knows is bullshit, or him just being a useful idiot fucking moron. But
and you have different foundations, and you pull one out. So I mean, poverty
I think
may
with the
not
key
be the
interval-
determinant, but maybe when you mix poverty with other sort of like structural factors in society, people's have less reason to feel a stigma about crime or less reason to be invested in society. But you don't subscribe.
Can you
to
give
that.
an example?
Can I give an example?
Yeah, of this other factor.
Hey, parents, do you know how your kids are being taught American?
blah 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 blah.
Well, I mean, I think that like if you have been stuck in extreme poverty for extended periods of time, if you live in a society where it is harder for you to find housing or loans or to get out of a specific area in which you're living, if you have been subjected to a socialization that labels you as a criminal, or that your activity just walking around is criminal, that it might create
Who's being arrested for walking around?
Well, not arrested.
Yeah, it's called stop and frisk. I'm going to go on Majority Report and talk about crime, and I'm going to show how much I know about crime. And then I'm going to say stuff like, who's being arrested for just walking around? Look up stop and frisk.
But harassed. I mean,
The criteria for stop and frisk by police officers is quite literally, they look suspicious to me.
think you wouldn't deny. I mean, your argument would be there's more violent crime in certain areas, and that's why there's more cops. But we also know that, I mean, if you're a Black teen and you're walking the streets in some neighborhoods you are far more likely to get stopped and harassed by the cops than if you're a white
Well, I
teen.
wouldn't say harassed, but you are more likely to interact with police. Yes,
Okay.
there's more police there.
I mean, I think
Yeah, because, you know, the sort of stop and frisk policies that only exist because of interpretations of the Fourth Amendment that are designed to water that amendment down so that people aren't protected from unwarranted search and seizure. That's not harassment. It's interaction, you fucking piece of garbage.
from the perspective of that person who is interacting with the police after having done nothing, they would perceive it as harassment.
For
You
sure.
wouldn't.
If I was a law-abiding person in a black neighborhood and I had to interact with the police due to the fact that, you know, criminals are acting up in my neighborhood, then that would get
Yeah, the reason that black people and black communities interact, quote unquote, with the police is because the criminals are acting up. It's not because, you know, police in those areas are basically functionally occupying armies.
get under my skin. I mean, I have.
What if you were like pulled over in like your car? I mean, I've told this story on the show many times, but I was an actor back in the day,
Sam,
and
you're still an actor, buddy. Just because there's a strike doesn't mean that they're not going to resolve that.
no, that's true. I do some voice work, but nevertheless, I was on a sitcom at one point, and it was a majority black cast. And one of the buddies was we went back to his place, and we pull in into the underground driveway parking lot, and a buddy of his pulls in behind us, and he's got one of those Range Rovers, and at that time that was a very popular car in LA with like the Hollywood set. This is back in the 90s. And he pulls in. He's like, "Thank God you're here. I just got I was getting followed again by the cops. I've been pulled over 4 times in the past 2 months. And they checked to see if I own the car. And I called the police department to see if I could get a sticker or something. And he said, the sergeant literally said, "Are you black?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "There's nothing I can do." Now, if you're a law-abiding citizen and you're driving the car that you earned to, and you bought the car, and you're getting that type of harassment, you don't think it impacts your perspective on society?
No, I think it does. And this is Los Angeles. And what time period?
It was in the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously, you know, there.
But
I
you
think-
just exceeded to me that concede.
Oh, it was in the 90s, so, you know, it's not happening anymore. It was in the 90s. You know, it was like 30 years ago, whatever it is.
Yeah, no, I think
this
that
happens
can
to
impact your attitude,
17-year-old
but I don't think.
boys in.
I mean, you
in
could
New
call
York
me
City.
crazy, but I don't think you're saying that your friend turned into a criminal because he was pulled over. He seemed like he was really annoyed.
I think if that happened to me, and I didn't have a nice car, but rather I just got stopped every time I walk out of my house, or stopped, I don't know, once a month every time I'm out of my house, which is not hard
then
to
you'd
find
start
as an
committing
experience.
rapes. Like I don't.
No,
where are
I
you going
would
with
start
this?
having a far less
You understand that, like, it's not you start committing rapes. It's you get involved in organized crime. Right? Like, this guy is like, "Oh, look, I'm the expert on crime. Crime is my issue," and he knows fucking nothing about it.
respect for society, and far less a perspective on that. Yeah, I definitely think that.
I mean, look,
but
I understand you don't watch my like you don't watch any of my videos or anything like that. But I said repeatedly, I think the warning needs to be brought back in terms of policing. I think writing tickets for expired registration when you're in areas with elevated rates of shootings, all that does is piss people off and turn the community against you. So there's definitely better ways to implement policy to get the community on your side. Like, I've been a huge advocate for consent searches, which is and this started in St. Louis in the 90s, which is if you're afraid that your kid is involved in a gang or might have a gun or might get shot, they have a high rate of youth homicides, still high to this very day, then you can call the police, consent to a search. They'll look for contraband, but they won't arrest your kid. I think that, and they'll send you.
Yeah, so the policy there would be we get black people who just are disproportionately targeted by the police. None of this shit about interaction and blah, 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 blah. Nah, disproportionately targeted. And we get police officers who we know, like police officers in this country, never mind the history, tend to be very racist, like in their policing work. Like that is a fact. We get those people who are also trained by to use force as the first option rather than trying to de-escalate things. You want those people to conduct consensual searches of the children of black families, families of color, etc. And that's your solution to this. Fucking moron.
Your kid to a diversion program before they get.
By the way, I mean, he can come up with whatever, disanalogies he wants for this. But, when police officers interact with children in schools, like when, the school has a police officer, that's, basically a mechanism for abuse by the police and funneling children into the prison system.
Into a shooting and all that. So I think that is a good policy to build community relations with the police. Like the way that you're speaking is as if I don't believe in that, even though I think that's absolutely crucial to the police being effective.
Okay. All right. Well, I think this was
yeah. Complete and utter fucking bullshit. So yeah, just had to do this because that pissed me off royally. Yeah. So, if you're interested in supporting the content, links are in the description, Patreon, blog, etc. I'm going to be doing another stream in a matter of hours, on something completely different, but I had to make, because this just pissed me the fuck off. Anyway, see ya.